Thank you all so much. So thanks for coming this evening, and youth for sharing some time in your youth group for this presentation. Yes, you can absolutely have cake. Head on right over there to Miss Aubrey. And we are going to start the presentation tonight with a brief video to kind of set us in the context of the Irish conflict. So this video is in cartoon form, and it was commissioned by the Queen's University in Belfast. So this will give you history of the conflicts in Northern Ireland in about 10 minutes. So here we go.
Like most countries, Ireland's population over the centuries has been influenced by many cultures. First, Stone Age man came, and eventually the Celtic culture made its way to Ireland. The Celts loved their music and art, and fighting with each other a lot, and stealing cows a lot. Not to mention inventing Halloween, where they sacrificed animals and people in great bonfires to keep the fairies away from their door, and welcome the dead back for one night and one night only. Then St. Patrick brought Christianity to Ireland. The early Christians in Ireland very wisely incorporated old Celtic traditions into Christianity, resulting in the old spring goddess Bridget becoming Saint Bridget. Eventually, the Vikings came to plunder monasteries and settlements, but apparently they liked Ireland so much that some of them decided to stay. They set up Dublin, Belfast, and most of the other major ports on the island. About 100 years after conquering Britain, the Normans came to Ireland, having been invited by the King of Leinster to help win his throne. The Norman leader known as Strongbow came, defeated the Vikings and the Irish, and became the new King of Leinster, and began what became the Norman rule, which spread across Ireland. The Normans built the first castles in Ireland and set up more towns. The Gaelic Irish weren't known for building towns, and because of this, when the Black Death reached Ireland, the Normans were much more affected than the Gaelic Irish. The English were worried that the Normans in Ireland were becoming more Irish than the Irish, and so they banned them from marrying into Irish families or speaking the Irish language. Whoop! When the Tudor King Henry VIII wanted a divorce, he split from the Catholic Church and in turn stripped the Church of its power in Ireland, seizing their gold and treasures and destroying many monasteries. His daughters, Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth I, continued a strong rule over Ireland, attempting plantations in Laois, Offaly and Munster, but the Irish were too tough to live with for the planters. In Elizabeth's last years, she fought a 9-year war against the chieftains of Ulster, the last corner of open rebellion against her. Hugh O'Neill surrendered eventually, only to find out that she had died a few weeks prior to the surrender. The new king, James I, who was Scottish, went about doing things a little differently. Rather than punishing the rebels, Rory O'Donnell and Hugh O'Neill, he made them earls. The earls soon discovered, though, that they had little real power and decided to leave Ireland and return with an army to retake the country. They never returned, and the flight of the earls left Ireland up for grabs with no more Irish chieftains left. King James arranged the plantation of Ulster, which was so successful much of it still exists today. Learning from the mistakes of the previous plantations, this plantation was much more extensive. Old towns were fortified and redeveloped, new towns were built, most of which with a uniform diamond shape, making it difficult to surround and easy to escape and or reinforce. Most of the Scottish settlers were Presbyterian, the English mainly Church of England. There were plenty of rebellions from the native Irish, including a very bloody and violent one in 1641, in which many planters were massacred. Word of these massacres reached England and people were appalled. In England, a Puritan named Oliver Cromwell set about ousting and executing the English king in what became the English Civil War. After he was done settling things in England, he set his sights on Ireland. His campaign in Ireland left a path of death and destruction. In the wake of this campaign came the largest land grab in Irish history, in which the native Irish were ousted from their land and told to head west, to Hell or to Connacht. Once again, English politics spilled over into Ireland when the exiled English King James II, who was Catholic, fought against the Protestant King William of Orange. William of Orange defeated King James but got bored of the war and struck a sweet deal with the Irish, giving them their land back. The English government didn't like this, and thus the penal laws were brought in at this time, which clamped down on Catholic and Presbyterian rights. The penal laws gave Catholics and Presbyterians a common cause in Ireland against the Loyalists. In the wake of the American Revolution, and more recently the French Revolution, the United Irishmen were set up. The Orange Order was set up in 1795 to commemorate King William's victory and to defend Protestant civil and religious liberties. After failed attempts to stage a French invasion, Theobald Wolfe Tone led the United Irishmen to fight for a republic in 1798, but they were defeated. In 1800, the Act of Union meant Ireland was now governed by one parliament in London, along with England, Scotland and Wales. Plenty rich Englishmen took this opportunity to set up large estates across Ireland and make plenty money. Catholics began demanding rights through Catholic emancipation, with many thanks to Daniel O'Connell, who organised monster rallies in support of the cause. Meanwhile, the loyal Protestant Orange men paraded every 12th of July. The government was so nervous of all these marches and rallies, it tried to ban them all. The poor native Irish had grown dependent on the potato, and when it failed year after year, hundreds of thousands, millions died of disease and starvation. Many too left the country for England and America, while many prisoners were sent to Australia. Ireland's population has never since recovered from the Great Famine. During the 19th century, Belfast was becoming a great city of industry, being one of the biggest suppliers of linen and later the great shipbuilding industries along with tobacco and whisky. Belfast was thriving in the British Empire. Demand for Home Rule grew in Ireland, except in the Protestant North, where, in Belfast, thousands known as Unionists signed against it in the Ulster Covenant, threatening open war against the South. Both sides began forming volunteer groups to prepare for the fighting. The Unionists paraded their orange banners, the Nationalists, demanding an independent Ireland, paraded their green banners. World War I helped stave off this potential civil war, but with Britain in the depths of a brutal European war, Irish Republicans staged a rising in Dublin in 1916. Over the coming years, Irish Republicans would fight against British rule, driving them to a stalemate. During the fighting, the Unionists in the North were sure that no matter what the outcome, they wanted to remain part of Britain. And in 1921, the Ireland was divided and Northern Ireland was created, with the majority of the population being Protestant. The rest of Ireland gained independence, with a parliament in Dublin, and went on in 1948 to declare itself a republic. The two newly formed states built identities around the dominant religious and ethnic groups. The Catholic Church dominated in Ireland, whilst Unionists in Northern Ireland formed a large majority in the new assembly in Belfast, effectively creating a Protestant parliament and a Protestant state. The Orangemen parades flew their flags of the Union even more. However, around one-third of the people living in Northern Ireland were Catholic. Many of these people found themselves effectively excluded from political processes and also discriminated against in terms of obtaining jobs and public housing. They were frequently stopped from flying their flags in parades. After the Second World War, everything started to change. In the 1960s, seeing the civil rights marches in the USA, some Catholics and liberal Protestants in Northern Ireland began their protests against discrimination. Lots of people were protesting, parading and waving flags and banners again. Demonstrations were opposed by the Unionist Northern Ireland government and policed by the largely Protestant police force, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and what began as peaceful protests escalated into violence. The plea for civil rights was met with a cry of no surrender. In 1969, violence had spread to urban working-class residential areas where existing segregation between nationalists and unionists was increasingly expressed through intimidating confrontations. Riots became frequent, policing was ineffective, and in August 1969, the government sent in British soldiers to relieve the police force. The Irish Republican Army claimed the right to use violence to force the British state to leave the 6 northern counties of Ireland. The IRA began attacking the police and the British Army and conducted a bombing campaign across Northern Ireland and England. To further complicate the dynamics of the conflict after 1969, two pro-state paramilitary loyalist organisations loyal to the British throne, known as the Ulster Volunteer Force and the Ulster Defence Association, also conducted a violent campaign against those seeking to bring down the state and often sometimes against civilian Catholics. There were even more demonstrations and parades. In 1971, internment without trial was introduced, in which many people were imprisoned if even suspected of being involved with the IRA. If they weren't involved before, many were very ready to get involved after their experiences. Atrocities caused by both sides occurred across the north and beyond. By the 1980s, the prisoners had lost their political status. Various protests, such as the Dirty protests and the hunger strikes, brought huge pressure internationally on Britain. This violent military confrontation saw over 3,500 people die and tens of thousands injured between 1969 and 1998. The majority of these casualties were non-combatants. This state of emergency, referred to by some as the Troubles and by others a war, saw an extraordinary military presence from the British state and some highly repressive practices in order to defeat the IRA. But times were changing. In 1994, the main paramilitary groups, the IRA, UVF and UDA, called ceasefires as part of an ongoing political process. In 1998, a multi-party agreement known as the Good Friday Agreement or the Belfast Agreement was reached that set up a power-sharing government in Northern Ireland. This agreement, legislated by British and Irish governments, allows the expression of Irish and British identities equal legitimacy. allows for power to be shared by the major political groups, and provides a mechanism whereby whenever the majority of people in Northern Ireland wish to join the Republic of Ireland, then the British state will facilitate this. Until that point is reached, Northern Ireland remains a part of the United Kingdom. However, problems remained. Protestant working-class populations in Belfast were separated by walls, flags were flown from lampposts to mark different areas, and there were still lots of parades. Some Catholic residents demanded that Orangemen should not be marching in Catholic areas and tried to stop them. Republicans also wanted their right to parade. The number of parades, demonstrations and marches increased. Confrontations and riots were frequent. Northern Ireland had greater peace, but there is still assertive politics on the street. With recent progressions in international relations, let us hope these countries and provinces continue into the future peacefully. Thanks everyone for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Find me on Facebook, Twitter, and all that jazz. Thanks again to the Institute.
Wow. So from that video, these are the pieces I want you to hold on to. There are 26 counties in the Republic of Ireland that want a free, independent Ireland from Great Britain. 6 counties make up Northern Ireland, and those are Irish folk that want to remain under British rule. The folks that want to remain under British rule, they go by several different names. Loyalists, Unionists are the 2 most popular. They are allegiant, loyal to Great Britain. Republicans and nationalists are allegiant to a free Ireland without any involvement with Great Britain. The conflict that they talked about spanning from 1968 to 1998 most impacts generationally the folks that we refer to as baby boomers and Gen Xers. So that's like folks in my parents' age group. My parents are 66, 67. So those were the people that were fighting in these conflicts. And so then their children, a generation later, so if mom and dad, if you will, were fighting in the early 60s, some of their kids were fighting in the late 80s, early 90s. The conflict, as the video said, is over at this point. There was a decommissioning of weapons that was a part of the Good Friday Agreement that was signed in 1998. Combatants on both sides, loyalists, unionists, and Republican nationalists, they met in churches and took apart their guns. And not just took them apart, but they took them apart in such a way that they could never be put back together again as a weapon. And so to think about these opposing groups that just years before, had they seen them down the street, they may have attacked them. The fact that they surrendered, they gave up their weapons, and then they said, this is also not going to be able to be used as a weapon ever again. That happened in churches. Gives me goosebumps just to think about. So there isn't much violence that's going on in Northern Ireland today. If there is, by millennials, meaning my age group, so the grandchildren of the first generation fighting in the conflict, it's because they have learned, they have inherited this transgenerational legacy of violence. So as I said, this conflict that was a 30-year conflict, 30-year war, was between 1968 and 1998. It ended in 1998 with the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, and I want to read this description of the Good Friday Agreement. It was an agreement between British and Irish governments and most of the political parties in Northern Ireland on how that land would be governed. The talks leading to the agreement addressed issues which had caused conflict during previous decades. The aim was to establish a new devolved government for Northern Ireland, in which the Unionists and the Nationalists would share power. On the constitutional question of whether Northern Ireland should remain in the United Kingdom or be part of United Ireland, it was agreed that there would be no change without the consent of the majority. The Good Friday Agreement also gave language and acts about decommissioning weapons on both sides, and it included the release of violent perpetrators on both sides. So persons who had committed acts of violence that were imprisoned were freed, both on the Unionist, Loyalist side and on the Nationalist, Republican side, without having to complete their sentence, without having to be on bail or probation. Everyone was freed. Now that caused a lot of disagreement among the people because there were family members who had lost loved ones as a part of this conflict. Remember that the video said more than 3,500 people were killed. Half of them were civilians. Half of them were innocent people that were not at all involved in this conflict. They weren't combatants, and yet they were the ones that died. Their family members wanted justice. Their family members to this day want justice, and they were having a hard time reconciling how letting people go from jail was justice for the loss that they had incurred. Okay. Drew, are you cool to sit back there and roll the slides? Is that fine with you? Thank you, sir. So I want to share with y'all, I'm not going to narrate each of these slides. I will show the slides, and then I will offer some commentary on them. So the first part of the presentation is of what I have called the Belfast Walls. Belfast is covered with graffiti and with large billboard-type murals all over the city walls. And so I'm going to ask Drew to show them to you. Children murdered by Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin, IRA's slaughter of the innocent. "100 years of the Ulster Solemn League and Covenant, quote, we will not have home rule. Five innocent Protestants murdered. Provisional Sinn Féin demands equality, respect, and integrity. These are pictures of the walls that are in Belfast. So these are operational gates that still open and close between the Protestant and Catholic areas in Belfast. They open at 7 o'clock in the morning and they close at 9 o'clock at night. And hanging off of this gate, the gate on the left is 12 feet tall. The gate on the right is double that, and it has cameras on both sides that are actively recording who's coming in and out. This is another picture of another gate between the two areas of town. Note that this one at the top of the gate, it's furled like this, so even if you tried to get over it, you would have to really clear to not get caught on the top of the gate. Razor wire is also a common accessory on these gates between the two parts of town. This gate on the left, so this is an IRA memorial that you're seeing on the left. That is a wall between the Catholic side of town and the Protestant side of town. So as we were at this memorial, we heard kids on the other side of the wall playing basketball and soccer. This is one of the tallest walls. It's about 40 feet tall. And then on the other side, so there's an abundance of murals remembering the trauma. Wherever you walk in Belfast, you can come across these images of the people that were harmed or killed. Some are very, very graphic. Some are just names written on a wall. As many of those there are art pieces like this, calling for peace, looking for hope, for restoration, a new day. So these are some reprints of art made by children in the local schools. Stand here and think about someone you love. Dance here and make a new friend. I'm glad that we're here together. Note that that's painted on a gate between the two sides. Yes, the one on the right. See, that's a gate right above it, a wall right above it. Thank you, Drew. This is a justice wall. It went around the corner of a street, and you might notice some figures from American history and from South African history, like Nelson Mandela's down here on the right. Martin Luther King is around the corner. People in Northern Ireland are looking to peacemakers around the world. How can they learn from other people's lessons and leadership? And again, notice that this is on a border wall between the Protestant and Catholic areas of town. In understanding, all the walls fall down. And then on the right, this is a piece of a poem that was written by a prisoner while he was detained during the Troubles. It's entitled Gray. He wrote, "I awaken to gray, and gray is my morning sun. I live gray, and all my days are like one. There are no colors, only shadows along my way. Sometimes I think the blood in my body must surely be prison gray." The mural on the left is a recreation of the creation mural from the Sistine Chapel. The mural on the right is drawing on some imagery from the Chronicles of Narnia, which I'll say more about in just a minute. And then this is the last wall. The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is a duty of the living to do so for them. And these are only some of the walls in Belfast. So there's this combination of art in memoriam as well as art in hope. Something that I found very curious about this art. So it's on the sides of private homes, it's on the sides of businesses, it's on the sides of community centers. All of this art, whether it's pro-unionist, loyalist, or pro-nationalist, Republican, whether it's looking towards a hopeful, united future, all of this art is squatting on these walls. Do you know what it means, students, when somebody says you're squatting or you're a squatter? That means that you've taken up residence there, but you don't have permission to be there. So these different groups have taken up this architectural real estate to send their message, and there's this sort of, keep to the code, this unwritten rule that if you don't mess with mine, then I won't mess with yours. And all of these messages continue on together. I want you to think about what it would be like to live in a place where there's a constant reminder of what happened. You see it when you go to work, when you go to school. What if some of this artwork was the mural background for your graduation, or for your wedding, or for your kid's sister's 8-year-old birthday party? What if that was the background for Kylan's birthday party, right? You're like, what? For some people, these walls are here because they don't want to forget. For other people, these walls, because they're here, it means they can't forget. Some of the people that live in Belfast, as you can imagine, no longer see any of these walls. They just don't see them. They're so much a part of the landscape, they don't even notice someone when they walk past them. For others, they register in the category of, I can't unsee it. I can't unsee these messages. And so each day we would walk around and we would see different of these walls, and then we would hear the stories behind them. One day while I was in Belfast, we listened to 3 different perpetrators of the violence on both sides. 2 of the men were imprisoned and then released. Actually, 3 of the men. 3 of the men were imprisoned and released as a part of the Good Friday Agreement. Another was actively organizing on behalf of the Unionist, Loyalist parties, but he was never detained. These sorts of folks that used to be combatants are now the folks that are sitting around tables continuing to work on the peace-building process in Northern Ireland. As we mentioned, I said it, and the video said it, more than 3,500 people were killed in the conflict. Half of them were civilians. A third of them were members of the British security forces, and 16% of them were members of paramilitary groups. The IRA, or the Republican paramilitaries, were responsible for 60% of the deaths. The Loyalists, 30%, and security forces, 10%. One day, we had the opportunity to hear from victim families. One man that came in and shared with us, his wife worked in a deli. She worked in her family's deli. And they were Loyalist Unionists. So they want Northern Ireland to remain a part of Great Britain. And one day, as they were closing up the deli, it was a drive-by bombing. And somebody took a pipe bomb and threw it into the deli. And this man's wife and his father-in-law were killed in the blast for no other reason than the fact that they were in a Unionist, Loyalist neighborhood. On the other side, we heard from a mother whose 18-year-old son went out one night, had just graduated school, was preparing to go to university, was going out to have some fun with some of his friends, and he decided he wanted to leave the party early. Oh, I can walk home by myself. And he was stabbed to death for no other reason than a group of kids were looking for a Catholic boy to kill. These 2, this man who lost his bride, left to raise their daughter, who was, I think, 4 at the time, on his own. This mother who had to say goodbye to her son, much too young. They are working actively in the peace process. They still want answers. They are among the group that are working towards peace and that are mad that justice hasn't been served or granted to their family yet. They want answers, and those answers may never come. We heard also from the Victims Advocacy Commission that's been established in Belfast. That's a group that is working on reparations for the families and the communities that have lost from a grassroots level to affect governmental change. So much like we have a benefits program for persons that have served the country in our military. As a gratitude for the work that they did, they are establishing a benefits program for the family members who have lost loved ones because of the conflict. I think we could agree that no amount of money can ever replace a person that you have loved and lost, but they're working towards making reparations. A caveat to that is, if you think about it, there are persons who were involved in the conflict, who were perpetrators of the violence, who also lost family members in the conflict, which means what? They would be eligible for that reparations program. And some of the people who also lost loved ones but were not actively a part, they were not combatants in the conflict, are saying, no. They don't get a part of that reparations benefit. And so this continues to be a place where they're working together and coming to resolution. Another one of the folks that came to speak with us was a woman. I'm going to need a t-shirt that says this across it. Her name is Debbie. She is the chair of the Policing Ombudsman Council in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and she introduced herself. She had on a wicked pair of shoes, and she said, "My name is Debbie, and I'm a mad woman with a passion, and so I'm going to need somebody to make me that shirt. I'm a mad woman. I'm Sarah, mad woman with a passion. But if you wrote Debbie on it, I'd probably take it too." And so she shared with us about the policing reform that they have done in Northern Ireland, the process that they have for complaints or concerns to be brought to this independent council to review how policing is done. The police in Northern Ireland are not armed. They don't carry weapons. Nothing stronger than a taser. Part of that is because firearms are illegal in Ireland. That doesn't mean they don't have them, but if you get caught with them, you don't want to get caught with them. And so their policing work is much more about mediation, and they have very high standards for about how their law employees, they don't even call them a police force. There's nothing in the name or titles with their policing groups that give any sort of enforcement or muscle type image. They are more community liaisons that go around to hear people out, to keep the community up to the standards of peace building that they have established since this 1998 agreement. And then there's this ombudsman, I struggle to say that word, Ombudsman Council that reviews the police both as an organization and individual officers to make sure that they are acting according to the terms that the community sets for how they will interact with the police force. Because during the conflict, the area was very gray about whose side was the police on, and were they acting at times on behalf of the police, or were they acting on behalf of their own agenda? They have shown through this Ombudsman Council that they're able to more clearly guide the practices of the police and how they relate to the community with better efficiency and peacefulness. And then lastly, we heard from faith leaders, primarily on the Protestant side. We heard from quite a few Catholic lay folk, mainly from Protestant faith leaders, that are coming together to continue to encourage this work, hosting these peace-building conversations within their sanctuaries, really reflecting on the language of the prophets of how we're called to beat our weapons into instruments that will cultivate the earth for something new to grow. The strategy of all of these groups working together, so former perpetrators coming around the table, victims, the Victims Advocacy Commission, the Policing Ombudsman Council, and the faith leaders. This is their combined strategy, that when they gather, they want to listen to each other. Wow, isn't that new? They want to listen to each other, hear stories and perspectives. Their meetings, when they gather, the primary agenda point is to hear and enter another's hurt. And because they have first done that, they practice valuing the humanity of another person. And in so doing, they revalue their own humanity. Because many of the people that spoke, the perpetrators and the victims, they felt like their humanity had been stripped away from them. And so when we can take hold of, once again, the belovedness that somebody sitting across from us is made in the image of God and is therefore holy and beloved, that just saying that, me saying that, looking out at all of you, I just felt like a release of tension in my body. It put myself at peace. It makes me more open, more vulnerable to share. That is their first task in each time that these different groups gather. These groups also try on with consistency that they can admit that two opposing statements can be true at the same time. It was incredible to watch as someone very loyal to Great Britain would say a statement of fact, of truth, and then someone very loyal to the Republic of Ireland would do the same thing on their side, and both of those truths would be hanging out in the air, opposing one another, and yet the speakers were at peace, and the speakers sat there in the tension. They didn't get up and leave. They didn't storm out. It didn't come to blows. When I think about our own political landscape here in the U.S., wow, I think we'd get a lot more done if we were able to try on that posture. And lastly, the strategy from all of these groups is that they have caught hold of the vision. The faith leaders would say it's God's vision, that peace is possible, that transformation comes, and that it takes people committed to the process. On both sides, there are things that the Unionists and the Republicans are celebrating. Yes, we have arrived. And there are other things that they're saying, nope, we're not there yet. And they're not giving up. They are not compromising. They want to continue to work together to find the absolute right combination of what fits for peace in their community. I think that's a pretty incredible thing. And again, if it were applied to our political context, wow. So these next slides are of the Skenos Center. I'll read this. The Skenos Project. The project is the redevelopment of a 2-acre site currently occupied by mission facilities and a commercial property, which has been acquired for the Skenos Project. Having cleared the site completely, a purpose-built development will be built on the lower Newtonards Road to facilitate a range of services and programs tackling social exclusion in many forms. So Gary Mason, who our group met with when we were in Belfast, he is a Methodist pastor in the area. He was appointed to the East Belfast Mission, which was sold so that they could acquire this property and build Skenos. Skenos is the Greek word for tent, drawing on the language from John 1:14, where it says Jesus came in and pitched his tent in the neighborhood, skenos meaning tent. And they feel that the Skenos Center is this big building where a number of community-oriented, community-valued, peace-building entities can be housed in the same space and work alongside one another towards the same goals. And so this is a cafe that they have outside. It's one of their income-producing ventures that furnishes resources for them to continue their ministry. It was a typical Northern Ireland day there, so nobody was eating outside because it was pouring. This is the outside of the building, taken in two pieces, very intentionally built to reflect what Belfast looks like on a sunny day. So you will see on these blue panels that it's painted to look like it's partly cloudy outside. Again, it was pouring. The yellow panels are to remind the community of the shipyard and the big cranes that they have working on the ships in the ports. We'll see them in just a minute. So this is the outside of the building. And then this is a picture of the church. So you can see the interior of the church on the right. And Jim Townsend, I'm so glad you're here. Let's build that. Do you see all of that natural light in there? Like, let's do that. Oh my gosh. Also, Drew Golding, the acoustics in that room, perfection. So this was a picture of the interior of the sanctuary. These are the doors going into the sanctuary, and you'll see these pieces going up the doors. Those are actually peat. So peat is a very prolific mineral rock resource in Northern Ireland. It's like prehistoric Primateria stuff. And so they are showing on the doors, if you will, the life cycle of the church. So you see, like, down at the bottom, that was the first Methodist community that was in East Belfast. And then each iteration is as the church has evolved or grown or come into its new iteration. And so they did this on the doors to always remind the people when they're coming into worship whose shoulders we stand on, whose legacy we are continuing, if you will. So at Skenos, they have a bunch of different community-minded, community-valued organizations housed in one place. They all agree to a small set of core values that are focused around peace-building work and cross-community dialogue. So if they've got if they have office space available and you want to come in and use that for counseling, social work, job training, educational enhancement, dance classes, art classes, whatever is your heart's passion that's going to touch into cross-community dialogue and the continued work of peace building, those organizations can take up space in the Skenos Center. They pay rent. Skenos turns that revenue into more community-minded ministry in their context. Okay. And then we'll land this presentation, with some community shots. So here we go. The first is that C.S. Lewis is from Belfast. Did you know that? I did not know that until I went there. And so this is C.S. Lewis Square, and it has a number of sculptures from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So if you'll see so here's some art first. So you've got like the Maugrams over there on the left, and you've got some pictorial, very lush and floral versions of Aslan on the right. Okay, so here's the wardrobe. So that is Lewis himself opening the wardrobe. And then you see Aslan on the top, on the back side of the wardrobe. And then as you walk down this lane, you come across first Mr. Tumnus, the faun. And then not far from Tumnus is the White Witch. Over 80 artisans worked on the headpiece of the sculpture alone. She is wearing this like nimbus of individually hammered snowflakes as her crown. Incredible. Continuing on, there are the beavers. I love the beavers. Bath day, worst day of the year. Down from the beavers, there's Aslan. He's huge, like 2-story tall. They have to, there are all of these signs that are like, please love our Aslan, please don't climb him. And then there's the little robin, who was one of the first to reawaken when the trees woke up. And then the stone table cracked. And then lastly, the Mogrim. Whew. So from C.S. Lewis Square out into the Belfast Wonderland. Look, I found a rainbow in Belfast. Sadly, it was off the side of the cliff, and both ends of it were in the very cold water of the lagoon. And our tour guide was like, the water's very deep there, ladies. I mean, I was intent to go after it. So this is a fish that's in Belfast, that each of the scales of the fish tell a story of a piece of the history in the town or for Ireland. Over here on the right, it's kind of Belfast's version of the Epcot ball. This is called the Rise sculpture. It was commissioned in 2011, and it cost nearly £500,000 sterling to build. It's 2 globes, which can be seen for miles around the city. They're cast in white steel to symbolize the rising of the sun and a new hope for Belfast's future, with a bed of reeds, so those are the poles sticking up, on which it appears to rest, or a reference to the natural heritage of the neighboring bog meadows, with lights at the end of each reed reflecting on its 2 globes. So that's what that is. Here is the shipyard, and so those yellow panels that were on the Skanos Center, they are reflecting these 2 giant cranes. One is named Samson, the other is Goliath. I can't tell you which one is which. I'm not sure that they know. The Titanic was built in this shipyard, and the dark humor joke in Belfast is the ship was fine when it left here. Other people say that it was not the Titanic, it was the North American iceberg that was the problem. So that's the shipyard. Now, this was probably my favorite little adventure. I had the opportunity to travel up to the Giant's Causeway, which is up on the very northeastern side of the country. And the Giant's Causeway is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's an area of about 40,000 interlocking basalt columns, which are the result of ancient volcanic fissure eruption. So as the volcanoes are erupting under what is now Ireland, they are pushing these basalt rods straight up. And they come up in columns that size anywhere from this size to this size. And they're just in straight columns. There's some more pictures of them. There you go. If you look way out there in the distance, the one that I'm in, where it looks like it gets really dark on the horizon, that's Scotland. It wanted to come out to see me and all of you. So yeah, look at these columns. The idea, the legend, so they say, is that this used to be the causeway between Ireland and Scotland, and that some giants got into a skirmish, and when they fell into the sea, they broke the causeway. This is what remains of it. It was very windy while we were out there. I think our tour guide said that it was blowing about hurricane force winds. It was like 80 mile an hour gusts out there. So that was fun. I was well positioned to stand on the rocks. Some of the other tourists were having some troubles. Next picture. Yeah. Now, these two pictures were taken about 2 minutes apart, and neither one of them are filtered. So it went from that blue sky up on the ridge top looking down towards the causeway, and about 2 minutes later, it looked like the one on the right. A couple more of the causeway. The one on the left is of a camel that's sleeping right down near the water's edge. The rock formations look like a camel, because all giants have camels. Don't y'all know that? And then the one on the right is of a ruined castle that I think was up for sale while we were there. Again, up on the causeway. There's that rainbow that we were chasing the whole time. This yellow plant grows wild all across Ireland. They mow it down, they mill it, and that is the plant that canola oil comes from. Sheep! Y'all knew you weren't going to get out of this presentation without sheep, right? Any Game of Thrones fans? In between, on this picture on the right, there's this like tiny little rope bridge. Apparently is in Game of Thrones a lot. So there you go. There's a rope bridge there. They used to let people walk on it, but not much anymore. And then this is a picture from Donaghadee of St. Patrick's Cathedral, so who brought Christianity to Ireland in 430-ish. So this is St. Patrick's Cross. That's his church. And then on the next slide, that's his grave. Thanks, Patrick. This is a lighthouse in one of the townships that we visited. And then this is probably one of my favorite combination of pictures. They don't really have street names in Belfast, which is hard to navigate. So you get around by going to different districts. So this picture on the left is in the Cathedral District, and it's of these LED rainbow-colored umbrellas that are spanning this lane of pubs. And when you walk under these LED umbrellas, which for me were a sign of inclusion and God's promise, you walk to the end of the lane to see this church, which is the largest cross in the entire country of Ireland. So I thought that was very fitting. And then this is the last slide of my presentation. It is a quotation of my favorite W.B. Yeats poem. And I just want to read what it says on the bronze. It says, "Had I the heavens and wrought with golden and blue and the din and the night and the light, I would spread but the light. But I being poor, and I have spread my dreams so softly, softly because of you, like embroidered cloths. I have only my dreams under your feet. Tread softly on my dreams." And so for me, I think that's the work of doing peace building. that we're holding our hopes and our dreams before one another in this world of where two opposing truths can be right at the same time, even though they're against one another. The work of peace building is saying, I'm going to tread softly forward, and I can only do that if you're with me. And so I continue to reflect on this experience in Northern Ireland, what it means for us here in the U.S. When it talks about peace building, be it across political lines, be it across racial lines. If we were to look first at another, to value their humanity, to hear their story, to learn something from their experience, and then see how we can work together as partners, y'all, I think anything's truly possible. So thanks for the friends that are worshiping, that joined our presentation online. Appreciate it. We're going to end the broadcast now. If you have some questions, email them to me. I'll get back to you.